So I had to get a new connection cord for my Yeti mic here. Set it down at the wrong angle and caused something to bend just recently, and I was like, all right, well, let me just do a quick preliminary test. And then I got thinking about it a little bit more, and I was like, yeah, I could do something fun for the channel. So I'm just doing a real quick rundown of the different voices I use for the different characters reading Angel's audio adaptation here. So I'm gonna go kind of from I'm just sticking to our biggest characters. You might have noticed that when I play any Gotham thug, all the Gotham thugs are down here. All the Gotham thugs fundamentally sound about the same. So it'd be boring to sit here and go through all of them, but it's a funny thing anyway. So I will admit, I mentioned this from the top that there was some trepidation to me about doing this project because I was like, I do not feel confident doing a whole lot of voices for women and whatnot. So, extend me some grace there and whatnot. So Cassandra's obviously our main character. She's not exactly the most talkative. However, other characters get quite a bit more dialogue than she does because some scenes she just stays quiet and whatnot. But if you've noticed, when I do Cassandra's voice is down here, so it's both it's an upper register, but it's still back of the throat. And there's kind of a slowness and a trepidation to it. And there's often kind of a hesitancy. Sometimes I'll add little filler, little ums and whatnot to portray that this is a voice that spent a long time not being used. It still doesn't exactly sound 100% natural. It sounds like it's still got some little scratchiness there from years of disuse. So that's where Cassandra's voice is. Inversely, Stephanie doing, two women's voices that could, not hardly be much more different. Stephanie's up here. She's higher and she's, top of the throat as opposed to back of the throat. And she talks a lot quicker. That's another one of the tricks to Stephanie. Stephanie talks quicker than Cassandra does. And she talks quicker than most of the rest of the cast does. Because, to imply that she's got a bit of a goofy streak. She's, a little bit, she can occasionally be a little hyperactive and all that business. The Brian Q. Miller run of Stephanie Brown comics are some of my favorite comics ever written. So when I read Stephanie up here. Now, Tim's voice kind of was a little bit of trial and error. So Tim's voice is just a little bit higher than my typical. I go just a little higher, and not as if it would even be unreasonable for him to talk in my normal voice. And when I do Dick here in a minute, you might be like, I don't even think there's all that much of a difference. But my Tim is up here. It's a little high to imply that he's just a little tiny bit younger than the other men. Comparing Tim's voice to Dick's voice, and that'll be apparent here in a minute. But Tim's voice is up here a little bit higher. And of course, when we're talking about a piece of Batman media, there's always the question of doing Batman himself. And when I do both Bruce Wayne and Batman, both kind of around here. So it's the deepest of the normal voices that I do. And, this implies kind of a firmness to it, a strength. I really can't do much of a Kevin Conroy, but, Kevin Conroy is my gold standard, and it's down here. And very occasionally Batman will get, especially angry, and I'll go down here, and he'll grow there's a little resonance in the throat if he's going to be threatening someone. But mostly Bruce Wayne and Batman are down around here. Now, the next kind of to go with someone who hasn't necessarily been huge in this particular story yet, but will grow more prominent as I do the later readings. Sadie's kind of around here, so she's high. She's not quite as low of a register as Cassandra is. But she's a lower register, but she is, she's a little higher than Cassandra, she's a little lower than Stephanie. So, Sadie sits somewhere here, as if she's got a little bit of a scratchy voice, as if maybe she's done some things she regrets, as if, maybe there was some young, we'll kind of get into that as we get more of her character. It says she's, from a little bit of a rougher childhood. There is kind of a roughness there, but she speaks faster too. Her pace, her words per minute are kind of up there with Stephanie's. So there's kind of a scratchiness I go for when I try to do Sadie, and it implies less feminine than Stephanie, but still better able to communicate than Cassandra. So Sadie's around here when I do her, and it's not ideal. She's one of the characters I think I kind of struggle with, but it's around there. Branching out, when I do Dick Grayson, I just do my normal voice. So I needed, I couldn't, I was kind of struggling to come up with, all right, what am I going to do for Nightwing? And eventually I was just like, I'll just do my normal voice. It's, deeper than Tim, higher than Bruce. So when I read for Dick Grayson, I'm just using my normal reading voice. When I read for Jason Todd, I add a little bit of an edge to it. So, it's very much, it's hardly any different from how I'm doing. It's really not all that different from how I do when I do Dick Grayson. But, he speaks a little quicker. He speaks with a little bit more of an edge to it. I can't think of a great way to describe it other than that. But my Jason Todd is right around here. Barbara Gordon's probably the one I have the hardest time differentiating from the others. But, so Barbara's around here. So she's lower down, still not as, back of the throat as Cassandra is. So Barbara's around here when she's, doing, this is Oracle, I'm doing calculations, yada yada. Barbara's around here. And that's another one I kind of struggle with to, be really super pleased with. I only know how to do so many feminine voices in a relatively, what I think the reader would consider a relatively neutral accent. There's no such thing as a neutral accent, by the way. All of these are still Midwestern Iowa me speaking for, people who actually live in New Jersey, but I've never really heard most of the Batman cast have New Jersey accents. They all sound, relatively neutral, which, you can make a whole case, or what I think of as neutral, which, that's a whole thing of how media is designed to be relatable and easily understood to you, the person watching and listening. And the last voice is Angel of the Bat's main villain, the Seraphim. So he's higher, he projects a lot. It's very hard to do this character's voice without shouting. He always needs to be shouting, because he's a ham, he's very over the top. He derives some of his identity from the idea of the shouty preacher character in Material. And boy, this character fucking sucks. But what a voice! A proud, proclaiming voice does the Seraphim have. So that's a rundown. That's just something I did here real quick for fun. Those are the major characters that I'm repeatedly giving voice to in my reading of Angel. Thanks for stopping in.